The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest stories ever recorded by humanity, older even than the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Bible itself. It tells the story of a king who faces terrifying creatures, ventures into the realm of the dead, and returns perhaps with the secret of immortality, but not quite in the form he expected. At the same time, it is an epic adventure, a fascinating mythological narrative, and a profound reflection on the limits of human existence. In this video, we'll dive right into what the text of this epic actually says. But before we do, it's essential to understand at least a little bit of the context of this extraordinary work. The King of Uruk. This is the title that appears in the royal lists of ancient Sumer for a ruler named Gilgamesh. According to these records, he was the fifth king of the post-flood era, and is said to have ruled the city for an incredible 126 years. Uruk, which was located in what is now Iraq, is said to have prospered under his rule, becoming one of the major centers of power in the ancient world. It is said that he was the one who built the city walls and ensured its stability. But did he really exist? Some historians believe that he did, probably around the 17th century BC. But this does not mean that he actually lived for more than a century, or that he was a gigantic demigod, as he also appears in these lists of kings. More likely, his fame was so great during his lifetime that, after his death, he inspired countless legends. In later versions of these stories, he was no longer just a hero, but a true god, worthy of worship and offerings like any other Mesopotamian deity. Whether myth or reality, the fact is that the Epic of Gilgamesh is the most important of the epic accounts written about him. The classic version of this poem dates back to the 14th or 13th century BCE, but it is based on even older stories that had been circulating in Mesopotamia since at least the 22nd century BCE. To give you an idea, this means that these tales are older than the birth of Christ is older than the present day. This classic version of the epic was recorded on 12 clay tablets written in cuneiform and can be divided into three main parts. The first is full of great adventures and heroic deeds. The second has a darker tone, following Gilgamesh on his journey through the underworld, where he hears the story of the Great Flood. The third, shorter part is also the most enigmatic. With this context in mind, we can finally delve into the text of the Epic of Gilgamesh and discover what these 12 tablets really tell us about the legendary king of Uruk, the struggles of Gilgamesh. The first part of the Epic of Gilgamesh begins by extolling its protagonist, a king described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. This supernatural origin makes him a giant of extraordinary strength. On the one hand, this is great for the people of Uruk, since he can protect them from any threat. But on the other, it is a disaster. Since nothing is truly a challenge for him, Gilgamesh gets bored easily, and when he does, he takes it out on the people themselves. He picks fights with the city's young men for no reason, and worse, claims the first night of all the newlywed women for himself, leaving the husbands of Uruk in despair. Tired of this abuse, the citizens cry out to the gods for help, and their prayers are answered. The goddess Aruru, creator of humanity, molds a wild man out of clay and places him on the outskirts of the city. This man, named Enkidu, lives among the animals, eating and drinking as if he were one of them. But the local hunters begin to see him as a problem and ask Gilgamesh himself to solve the situation. The king, always eager for a new challenge, turns his attention to this mysterious figure, which, at least for a while, brings some relief to the people. Gilgamesh's plan to deal with Enkidu is curious. He sends a harlot to him. The idea is that by experiencing the pleasures of civilization, Enkidu will distance himself from nature and lose his connection with the animals. The plan works. For 7 days and 7 nights, Enkidu and the harlot stay together. Afterwards, she teaches him human ways, to eat bread, to drink beer. The transformation is complete. When he returns to the forest, the animals run away from him. He is no longer one of them. Now he has knowledge, consciousness, and a new place in the world. The harlot then takes him to Uruk. There, the expected happens. He meets Gilgamesh. The two immediately face each other in brutal combat. The fight takes over the city streets, destroying everything around. Gilgamesh narrowly wins, but the result is not enmity, quite the opposite. For the first time, he finds someone he considers an equal. Instead of rivals, the two become inseparable companions. Enkidu is the first to manage to divert Gilgamesh's attention from his own people. The god's plan seems to be working, but not for long. The friendship between the two quickly turns into a quest for great deeds. The first of these is an expedition to the cedar forest where Humbaba lives, a terrible monster that, according to the text, breathes fire and breathes death. Gilgamesh and Enkidu set off without thinking twice. Once there, without hesitation, they attack the creature, tear off its head and lungs, and return to Uruk carrying these bloody trophies. This brutal act does not go unnoticed. The goddess Ishtar, deity of love and war, is impressed and proposes marriage to Gilgamesh. But he knows his reputation well and refuses. Ishtar, furious at being rejected by a mortal, asks her father, Anu, the god of the sky, to send the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk. If he does not, she threatens to open the gates of the underworld and release the dead to devour the living. Faced with this threat, Anu gives in, and the bull of heaven descends to earth. But even he is no match for the two warriors. Gilgamesh and Enkidu defeat the creature, and, to add insult to injury, Enkidu tears off one of its legs and throws it at Ishtar, mocking her. At this point, the gods realize that their plan has completely failed. Instead of restraining Gilgamesh, they have created an even more dangerous duo. Two mythical beings have already been slain. Humbaba, guardian of Enlil's sacred forest, and the bull of heaven, symbol of Anu's power. The cosmic balance is threatened. Something must be done. The gods make a decision. One of the two must die, Gilgamesh or Enkidu. The sentence falls on Enkidu. He is struck by a devastating disease, and within days, the once mighty warrior withers away. He who once slew monsters and defied gods is now just a man, frail and powerless. Gilgamesh watches helplessly as his best friend dies. And this is where the second part of the story begins. Gilgamesh's journey to the underworld, where he will also hear the story of the Great Flood. Gilgamesh's mourning Enkidu's death devastated Gilgamesh. The once invincible and proud great king was now utterly bereft. He wept for days beside his friend's body, refusing to accept his loss. It was only when a worm fell from Enkidu's nose, a brutally vivid detail in the original text, that he was finally able to break free and give Enkidu a proper burial. But the suffering did not end there. Gilgamesh had not only lost his best friend, the only person who had truly meant anything to him, but he was also forced to face a terrible truth. He himself was not immortal. If even Enkidu, so strong and full of life, could be taken by death, what was to stop the same from happening to him? Unable to accept this fate, Gilgamesh made a drastic decision. He had to find a way to escape death. Legends spoke of only one man who had achieved this feat, one who had somehow achieved immortality. Thus, driven by hope and despair, Gilgamesh set out on an unprecedented journey to find him and extract from him the secret of eternal life. However, the path would not be easy. To reach this immortal man, he would need to cross the boundaries of the world of the living and reach the banks of the dreaded river of death. His journey began by climbing the mountains of Shamash, the sun god, whose daily route crossed this unknown territory. At the top of these mountains, he encountered the Scorpion Man, a colossal and fearsome guardian, whose mere sight was enough to frighten any mortal. But Gilgamesh, even shaken, remained firm and obtained permission to continue. His next stop was unexpected, a tavern on the threshold between life and death. There the innkeeper, a mysterious woman who seemed to understand more than she was saying, tried to dissuade him. She warned him that no one can cheat death, that he should enjoy his life instead of wasting it on an impossible quest. But Gilgamesh would not be convinced. Determined, he insisted so much that she finally gave in and revealed the next step: to find the immortal man's boatman, the only one capable of guiding him through the mortal waters. After more challenges, encounters, and tests of his determination, Gilgamesh finally reached his final destination, the home of the immortal man named Utnapishtim. When he was finally able to ask the question that had been tormenting him so much, "How can I achieve immortality?" the answer he received was not what he expected. Utnapishtim did not give him a secret or a magic formula, but rather a story, the story of the Great Flood. According to him, long ago the gods decided to exterminate humanity with a devastating flood. However, one of the gods, Enki or Ea in the Akkadian language, revealed the plan to a single human, ensuring that he and his family would survive to repopulate the world. This human was Utnapishtim himself, who followed divine instructions and built a colossal vessel, taking with him his family and a representation of all life forms. When the waters destroyed everything around him, he waited patiently until the flood stopped, testing the land by releasing birds to see if they could find dry ground. Finally, when one of the birds did not return, Utnapishtim knew that the land was ready to be inhabited again. As a reward for his extraordinary survival, the gods granted him immortality, separating him from humanity and exiling him to the banks of the river of death. Gilgamesh was devastated. The story he had heard gave him no hope. Utnapishtim's immortality had not been earned through his own merit, but had been granted by the gods in a unique and unrepeatable situation. In other words, there was no secret that Gilgamesh could follow to achieve the same destiny. However, before he left empty-handed, Utnapishtim's wife revealed to him one last hope. There was indeed a way to regain his youth, not to become immortal, but to restore his vitality. This technique involved a rare plant that grew at the bottom of the waters of death. If he could gather it, he could at least stay young for longer. Excited by this possibility, Gilgamesh dove into the deadly waters and managed to pull the plant from the bottom, his heart filled with hope. Perhaps he would not live forever, but he could prolong his strength and power. However, on the way back, while he was resting exhausted after so many trials, a serpent sneaked up, swallowed the plant, and immediately rejuvenated himself, shedding his old skin for a new one. And it was at that moment that Gilgamesh understood that he had failed. His last chance to escape death had been snatched away from him in the blink of an eye. There was nothing more he could do. With no other choice, he returned to his hometown of Uruk, carrying an overwhelming sense of frustration. But upon arriving, something unexpected happened. Standing amidst the imposing walls of the city he himself had built, Gilgamesh felt something different. He looked at the grandeur of Uruk, at its buildings, at its people. Then he turned to the boatman who was with him and told him to contemplate that grandeur too. And it was there, at that moment, that Gilgamesh seemed to find a different answer to his quest. Perhaps immortality of the body was impossible, but there was another kind of immortality: legacy. His city, his history, his achievements, all of this would live on beyond him. His name would be remembered, his works would stand the test of time. Gilgamesh had not achieved the immortality he desired, but perhaps he had found another way to defy death. And so his story ended, but his name lives on to this day, crossing centuries and civilizations, proving that, in a way, he had indeed achieved eternity. After the end, many people consider the Epic of Gilgamesh to end with the king's return to Uruk and his acceptance of mortality. But there is one last tablet, the enigmatic Tablet 12, that adds an unexpected chapter to the story. In it, both Gilgamesh and Enkidu are alive again, as if the previous events had never happened. And interestingly, the two are not involved in any great battle or quest for immortality. They are simply playing a game, something like an ancient type of bat and ball. But then, something happens that completely changes the tone of the story. In the middle of their game, the ball from the game falls into a deep hole, and this hole, unfortunately for them, is no ordinary hole. It extends all the way to the underworld, the dark world of the dead. To show his loyalty and love for Gilgamesh, Enkidu offers to go down and retrieve the ball. But what seemed like a simple act turns into a terrible trap. Enkidu is trapped down there. The underworld does not allow him to return, yet somehow Gilgamesh manages to communicate with his friend. And through these dark conversations, Enkidu describes what he sees in the underworld. There is no joy, no pleasure, just an empty existence. But what strikes Gilgamesh most is that not all the dead suffer equally. The experience of the underworld depends on something the living do or fail to do. Funeral rites. Those whose families preserve their memory, perform ceremonies, and offer tributes have a somewhat less cruel fate. Those who are forgotten or who do not receive the proper rites suffer even more. And so ends this third and final part of the epic. Its tone and structure are so different that many scholars believe it may have been a later addition, but at the same time, it makes sense as a thematic conclusion to the story of Gilgamesh. After all, if there is one theme that runs through the entire epic, it is death and the ways in which humanity tries to deal with it. From the beginning, the story shows different responses to this universal fear. There are those who try to escape death through glory and heroism, those who seek solace in companionship, and those who cling to rituals and memories. But in the end, the message of the text is clear. Immortality in the literal sense is impossible for mortals. Not even the most powerful kings, the greatest heroes, or the demigods can escape it. Youth also never returns. So, faced with this reality, what should we do? The text suggests that the answer is not despair or a desperate search for magical shortcuts, like Gilgamesh's journey after Enkidu's death. The answer, perhaps, is to accept the only life we have, the one that is already here now. Whether on the battlefield, in a great city, or within the walls of Uruk, where the journey begins and where, inevitably, it ends. And this is what the Epic of Gilgamesh tells us. For those who want to delve deeper and read the original text, I recommend the direct translation from Akkadian by Professor Jacinto Lins-Brandão from UFMG. And if you're into ancient Mesopotamian culture, then check out the video about Lilith. I think you might find it interesting. As always, thanks so much for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.